What's going on, guys? John here with Jack for another episode of Talking Ball in a new video series here, 2020, a recap of the 2013 NBA Draft. And when you look back on the 2013 NBA Draft, it had it was a narrative that it was a really weak draft, especially compared to past drafts and upcoming drafts in 2013. And really, for the most part, I wouldn't say that's proven to be completely false, but it was definitely a disappointing draft class, especially at the top 5 picks, top 10.
And I think there's a couple of reasons for that, John. The first being the high-profile talent from the major schools just didn't have that star-level potential that you usually see.
Yeah.
The other reason was that the crop of one-and-done freshmen just wasn't that strong.
You know, I was about to bring that up. You look at these guys, there's not a lot of one-and-done guys. You have Nerlens Noel. He's the one that sticks out to me, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously Anthony Bennett was one and done, and
right.
He was number one pick, but he surely, didn't pan out. Really, when you look at these guys, you don't get until you get to number 12. Steven Adams was the best one and done guy.
Yeah.
And when you looked at him and when he came out from Pittsburgh, you thought, at least I did at the time,
yeah,
man, he's really raw. He could have sure used a few more years at school to develop some skills. And so the crop of one and done freshmen just wasn't what it was previously, and certainly not what it's been since. I mean, this 2017 crop of one-and-done guys just was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And so by no means are we comparing those two, but those are just the two main reasons I think as to why the class wasn't so strong. And going back and, just looking and taking at a lens from the 2013 time, the Cavs had a tough decision. There wasn't anybody who was standing out. The two guys who were probably viewed as the best players at the time, Oladipo and Otto Porter, both were thought of as really high-level role players, guys who
And that's exactly what they've turned out to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, Porter just signed a huge contract with the Wizards, max deal, but one that, his market value surely made worthy. And, Porter and Oladipo weren't really considered. Oladipo somewhat for the number one pick, but not really all that much. Nerlens Noel was considered as well, but after the ACL injury he had, it just didn't seem like the right time for the Cavs. And a guy like Ben McLemore, actually, many people forget, was considered the most polished prospect in this draft class. And, it left the Cavs with a very tough decision, and it led to arguably the most iconic draft reaction from Bill Simmons. Oh!
Yeah.
Anthony Bennett.
You can't forget that. Yeah.
Can't forget that reaction. And he's arguably been the worst number one pick, especially since he didn't have injury-related problems that caused him to flame out so quickly.
Yeah, and when you draft a guy at number one, even if they're not what you expect them to be, you at least expect them to be a contributor in some way, shape, or form on your team. And yes, they traded Bennett in when LeBron James came to get Kevin Love to Minnesota, and
along with Andrew Wiggins.
Right, along with Andrew Wiggins, of course. And Bennett couldn't revive his career in Minnesota either. So he where he went, he just was not very good. I'm pretty sure he played in the D League even for a year or two.
He ended up on two other teams, the Brooklyn Nets and the Toronto Raptors. And it was just downhill. Yeah,
he never turned out to be anything close to what his draft stock draft status projected him to be, right. Looking at just some of the other players here, Cody Zeller, from Indiana, just, wasn't great. Alex Len wasn't great. But, speaking of Len, although he wasn't great, the crop of international players was really what lifted this draft class 4 years now down the road from being horrible to actually, maybe just average. And considering they have one of the second best player in the East and one of the best players in the NBA, Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Exactly, John. That's a great point. And I mentioned the two reasons earlier why I felt this class wasn't viewed strongly.
Right.
But here are the two reasons why it's turned out to be, as John said, actually about an average draft class. Not a very weak one as it was deemed to be initially. The first, as John said, the strong crop of international talent, starting with Giannis. But then Rudy Gobert turned out to be a force, the Stifle Tower. Everyone saw him. They saw his wingspan, his height, but they didn't really think those tools were going to work, and that's obviously why he fell to that 27th pick. But Utah, with their player development over there, I can't stress that enough. They've done a tremendous job developing their guys who they select, and Gobert has definitely been, a prime example of that. But then, Steven Adams at 12 from New Zealand. Yes, he did play at Pittsburgh. Kelly Olynyk, again, from Canada. Yes, he did play at Gonzaga collegiately. But then, Dennis Schroeder played for Germany. And so the crop of international talent, and then even a guy like Alex Abrinas, who came over recently to the Thunder, has a nice three-point stroke. Really has helped buoy this draft class and really return it to be more of a more average class. And the other point is that some of these guys who didn't go to the big name school, the power conference schools, who are veteran players, as was the case with the third best player in this draft, C.J. McCollum, who went to Lehigh, senior there, and has turned out to be a tremendous offensive player. But then later on, in the 20s, you had some interesting players drafted. When you look at Tony Snell, who's turned it around with the Milwaukee Bucks, Andre Roberson, who's a tremendous defender for the Oklahoma City Thunder, and then even guys like Gorgie Jang, Mason Plumlee, Tim Hardaway Jr. have had respectable NBA careers. And in the 20s, if you got a guy who does have a respectable career, that's definitely sufficing the draft status.
Yeah, and I just want to briefly bring up Michael Carter-Williams, who obviously has really regressed, but he was Rookie of the Year that year.
Right.
And he was pick number 11. So, it just goes to show you how kind of this draft was kind of upside down in terms of the value of it, and even some undrafted guys who were really, really exceptional.
Yeah, let's get into those guys. Good point there, John. Obviously, the cream of the crop of these undrafted guys, Robert Covington, at 6'9", with his ability to defend and knock down three-pointers.
A really important piece for Philly.
Moving forward, especially, and you got to think he's a guy who's going to play better with better talent surrounding him.
Right.
In addition to him, you had, the NBA final star, Matthew Dellavedova, as an undrafted player. Seth Curry also was undrafted. It's taken him a few years, but he's turned out to be a tremendous scorer and shooter of the basketball. And even a guy like Rodney Magruder, who didn't, have his rookie season until this past season, but then made an all-rookie team, second team. And obviously Jan Clark as well has turned out to be a pretty solid player. And as John said, really, upside down value-wise, where a lot of these smaller school veteran guys collegiately ended up being good, as well as these international prospects turned out to be pretty solid NBA players.
All right, guys, let us know what you think about this draft class. Who did your team pick that year? Did you like them or not? What other draft classes do you want to see? This is going to be a whole new series, so we'll be covering both NBA and NFL drafts from the past. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for listening, guys. We're out.